compiled the cash withdrawals over a period of time, precisely from 2015 to date, we discovered that state governments have withdrawn over 701 billion in cash, with some states withdrawing up to 24 billion naira. And then we also discovered that the federal government withdrew in cash up to 225 billion, while the local governments withdrew up to 156 billion. So if we are to apply the law here, all the public servants involved in these withdrawals are entitled to 3 years imprisonment. That's what the law said. Now, it became necessary for us to direct and order the financial institutions to stop completely cash withdrawal from public accounts. We have issued an advisory to all the governors and all the local government chairmen and all the MDs in the federal government we give them between now and 1st of March 2023 to put all facilities in place to operationalize the guidelines. So what is the bottom line? Is that on the 1st of March, if there is cash withdrawal from a government account of even if it is 1 naira, we are going to trigger off money laundering and corruption investigation anywhere at all. Even if there are special needs to withdraw cash from any public account anywhere, that will have to get a presidential approval.
Very serious guidelines there from the NFIU. If they will have to trigger a fraud alert if there's even a naira withdrawal, cash withdrawal from any public account. Well, we'll see how that goes from the 1st of March. And it's not far away from the budget, the 2023 budget, and how to make it impactful. Of course, by now we do know it's 21.83 trillion naira. And what we're looking at today is 80% of revenue, which is projected to be, total revenue is projected to be about 10.49 trillion. And 80% of that is about 8.4 trillion will be used for debt servicing. And we have some other details from that. But let's have our guest joining us now, Abdul Kudus Isiaka. He's an economist with ProShare. Thank you so much, Mr. Isiaka, for your time this morning. Well, I guess we've been talking a whole lot about the issue of debt servicing. So when we hear that 80% of the total projected revenue for the year, which is about 10.4 trillion, is going to be used for debt servicing. For someone like you, it doesn't come as a surprise because we've been following up on the story. But what are the implications of it?
Okay, thank you very much, Jenny, for having me once again. I think our worries around fiscal deficit and consequently debt stock are, genuine concerns. However, in assessing, debt sustainability, which seems to be at the heart of all of our discussion, we need to realize that, there are at least 4 parameters to look at. You should look at, fiscal deficit as a ratio of GDP. You should also look at debt stock as a proportion of your GDP. You should consider, how much cost of, financing your debts, that's debt service to revenue ratio. You should also look at, the foreign debt obligations as against your revenue. So I feel all of these ratios will be affected, by, this 80% debt service that we plan, for 2023. That said, however, we need to allay some fears. Of these 4 metrics I mentioned, or 4 parameters I mentioned, Nigeria seems not to be doing too badly in at least 3 of them, except for debt service to revenue ratio, right? And, if we look at debt stock to GDP, yes, now that we're going to be onboarding, as it were, the ways and means advances of the CBN to the federal government, we're likely to see, debt stock rise to 77%, which would push, debt stock to GDP to around 35%. And of course, in keeping in tandem with that, the medium-term debt strategy, debt management strategy paper already indicated that we would increase our debt limit to about 40%, pardon me, up from 25%. So we're not doing badly. For most countries that are peers of Nigeria, we're looking at debt stock to GDP of around 50%. So we're not doing badly on that count. also in terms of fiscal deficits with GDP, yes, there's a fiscal responsibility act that must be kept sacrosanct, except in unusual cases. So the statute itself provides that in some unusual cases, we can exceed the 3% of GDP threshold. And then finally, if you look at foreign debt obligation to revenue, we're not doing badly either. For 2023, we have $500 million Euro bond maturity, and apart from that, we're good for this year. Yes, revenues have been plummeting. We're at around $37 billion as of November 2022. But even then, we seem not to be faced with a situation where we're unable to meet our foreign obligations. So yes, there's a big problem with debt service revenue ratio, but all the other counts we're not doing badly. Now, what's responsible for the situation with debt service revenue ratio? You tend to have this debate amongst economists. Maybe it's a debt problem, it's a revenue problem. The truth of the matter is that it's both at the same time. So we seem not to have been innovative enough in coming up with revenue. And we seem also to be doing not so well in terms of bargaining well in terms of the cost of funds. So not be borrowing well. So we can borrow better, and we can raise more revenue, and we can also plug revenue leakages. So we're looking at issues around the scourge of oil theft. We're looking at subsidy removal. We're looking at issues around restructuring of tax waivers. And we can do better in terms of the stamp duty saga as well. So if we're able to recover 80 to 89 trillion naira that is, touted in all of this stamp duty saga, that should also help our situation. We may not necessarily have to make recourse to the debt market, to, fulfill some of our fiscal operations.
All right.
I think we can also make some ginormous savings by looking at plugging that oil revenue leakage. So of course, we must admit the fact that the federal government has been doing some good job in terms of addressing revenue lost on account of oil theft. But,
all right, Mr. Isiaka, just a minute. Let's just look back a bit. The projection is that for 2023, our total revenue would be 10.49 trillion naira. Now, the estimate for 2022, I think we do have a slide for that. If we can have that slide showing the 2022 revenue as at November 2022. As at November, we had only met 87% because it was projected to be 6.50 for 2022, but we did 87%. Now, if we're projecting 10.49 for 2023, what's the assurance? Now, I know the government has been more aggressive already beginning with the with the 2022 finance bill, that they're going to be more aggressive with the issue of taxes and non-oil revenue and all of that. But what's the assurance? Because this is the basis of, whether we have a good ratio, debt to revenue ratio or not, is that we meet up with that revenue. At the beginning of 2022, we didn't see the oil theft figures coming out. We didn't see us not being able to meet up with our quotas or even producing less than 1 million barrels a day. So if we're projecting 10.49 trillion for 2023, and when we just look about some months down, which is by November 2022, we only did 87%. What's the assurance we'll meet up with this year?
Okay, so we can be critical of the government and its plans, but I think we need to stick to the facts, right? If we look at the assumptions of the budget, 1.69 million barrels per day is something we can do this year, given some of the improvements we've made in terms of crude oil production. If we also look at the assumption of $75 per barrel for crude oil price, benchmark crude oil price, is also not something that we can think to be unrealistic for this year. Even though there are fears of global recession, the possibility that could, send prices downwards, but we don't see it coming down below $75 per barrel. So if you look at some of those fundamentals, we look to be fine for this year. And I feel that, yes, there has been perennially a problem with performance of revenue. As of 4 months 2022, we had oil revenue in particular performing only about 29%. So we had almost 65% or more underperformance of oil revenue. Also, as of 8 months, we had only about 60% or 64% performance of revenue in total. So yes, I agree with you that there have been issues around performance of revenue, and that's why perennially also we've seen actual deficits exceed planned budget deficits. But I think overall we look to seeing something better. However, we must appreciate the fact that this year we're taking a very enormous portion of our budget. We're relying a lot more on budget deficits for this year. About 50% of the budget itself, is relying upon budget deficits, and that means that there's a lot of borrowing cost implications. Of course, we saw the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning say a couple of days ago that if we don't get the National Assembly to address these issues around securitizing the ways and means lending, it's possible that the government would incur an extra 1.8 to 2 trillion naira in terms of debt costs, and it's a major worry. However, in terms of, to specifically answer your question, in terms of revenue, I think we're doing better in terms of crude oil production. Let's admit that. The government is doing a lot more in terms of addressing crude oil theft. They're more aggressive in terms of raising taxes, although, and I think this must be said, it's not likely that you raise revenue significantly in an economy that is slowing down. So you want to tax carbonated drinks, of course they backtracked on that, or yeah, you could say they backtracked on that, and they want to tax, increase excise duties. Looking at the SRGI, that's the Strategic Revenue Growth Initiative. They've anchored it on 3 points: taxes, excise duties from the SCS, and some independent revenues from DOEs, that's government-owned enterprises. But the truth of the matter is, all of the three, we could contribute a little to what we want in terms of the over 10 trillion naira revenue we project. But then again, we must appreciate that privatization and licensing contributes only a little above 200 billion naira in the 21.82 trillion naira budget spending that we plan for 2023. I think that we're underexploiting what privatization and licensing can do. We can do a lot more by offering a lot of these redundant assets we have around the country to foreign investors. That would help boost our reserves, position with our reserves. We talked a while ago about how the reserves are being plummeted. So we can boost our reserves and also improve our fiscal position by exploring privatization and licensing for greenfield and brownfield investment. So, yes, I agree that we may not perform 100% in terms of revenue, but we should see something much better compared to 2022.
All right, Mr. Eska, thank you so much. But it is important to note that, I mean, for this year, this revenue is 22% is the one that is hinged on oil. The others is hinged on non-oil. Yeah. And as you have noted, the economy doesn't seem to be growing that fast. So the non-oil sector, how strong are they to be able to provide this about 78% of that revenue, even with what we have seen with the 22 finance bill? But anyway, it's a new dawn. It's a new dawn. We'll certainly follow and see. But we have to thank you so much for your time this morning. Abdul Kudus Isiaka is economist with ProShare.
Yeah, thank you for having me.